Hello, everyone. I'm Faria Nasruddin, the program associate with the Middle East program at the Wilson Center and project lead on the Middle East Women's Initiative. I'm here today with Dalal Mawad to talk about women's histories in Lebanon and her new book, All She Lost. To quickly introduce Dalal, she is an award-winning journalist with more than 12 years of experience. Her work has largely focused on the Middle East and North Africa, on marginalized and vulnerable communities in the region. She now works as a freelance producer for CNN in Paris and as a part-time journalism professor at Sciences Po. Mawad was also a producer with the Associated Press based in Lebanon when the twin blasts rocked Beirut on August 4th, 2020. She extensively covered the explosion and its aftermath, as well as Lebanon's economic and financial crisis since 2019. Mawad has also worked as a regional video producer for the United Nations Refugee Agency, covering displacement in the Middle East and the world. Prior to her work at the UN, she was an on-air reporter with LBCI, a Lebanese broadcaster. Her latest book, as I mentioned, is titled All She Lost and tracks the horrific Beirut blast and through interviews with the women affected. Dalal, thank you for taking the time to chat with me today, and I'll hand it over to you to present a little bit of an overview of the book, but specifically, I'd like to ask you, why specifically did you focus on women and why choose this methodology to present the heartbreaking mosaic of stories from the Beirut blast?
Yes, thank you for having me. So, All She Lost is, I would say, the story of Lebanon's recent unprecedented collapse and the Beirut explosion, as narrated by women who survived on that day. And every single woman in that book lost something on August 4th and has lost a lot throughout Lebanon's modern history. So, these stories weave together kind of give you a bigger picture of what Lebanon has been like the past 5 years, but also the past 5 decades, because a lot of the women would take me back to the Civil War. There's some modern history in there. I chose to tell the story of Lebanon's collapse and the Beirut explosion from the women's perspective because of various reasons. First of all, when I met a lot of the survivors in the aftermath, when I was reporting for AP and I interviewed them, I realized that the most powerful stories came from women. And it's very much the case throughout my reporting from the Middle East that, whenever I was interviewing women, they were the most powerful story tellers. But I also realized that they rarely have that safe space to tell their stories. And I wanted to give them the platform and that space where they felt secure to talk about what happened to them. Second reason, and I think that's a compelling one, is that history is rarely written from the perspective of women, whether that's in the Middle East or even across the world. Women are active and major players in history, but they rarely get to write it. And so I wanted to empower women to tell their stories. And this is where the methodology, or also the way I narrate their stories comes in, that there's a lot of oral history in the book. So there's narration, reporting, I'm in there, but I give these women a lot of space to tell their stories uncensored. There are chunks of narration from these interviews as they told me, as they recalled August 4th, or the economic crisis and the burden of that on their lives. And just to finish very briefly, I have a personal connection also with the book because I talk about my grandmother, who in 1958 lost my grandfather. He was killed in a revenge killing following a massacre in my hometown. And I come from a village where many presidents were elected. It's very political, but also there are family clans, and politics very much revolves around families. And my grandpa was killed, although he had nothing to do with that massacre. And my grandmother lived her whole life without finding any justice. And she died without that sense of justice because the man who killed my grandpa never went to prison. And so fast forward, many decades later, I saw my grandmother in all of these women that I met. And I saw how they were grappling also with impunity and the lack of justice in Lebanon.
Thank you. That was a fantastic overview. I'd like to ask you, and you touched upon this a little bit, that the book not only tells stories of the past 5 years, but the past 5 decades of Lebanon's modern history. And
Yeah.
so aside from or elaborating a little bit more on the lack of justice and impunity, what do their stories reveal about Lebanon's recent history that might otherwise not be mentioned or go silenced?
Yeah, so I went there to talk about the explosion. That was the initial project, and honestly, there were so many themes that came out in the interviews, and you will see when you read the book that these women are going to mention, yes, the economic crisis, but also the unfair laws and the discrimination against women in Lebanon in recent and modern history, because our laws are managed by religious courts, unfortunately. They are not really civil laws. And these courts discriminate not just between men and women, but also between women. So a woman from, if a woman is, let's say, Sunni, she doesn't have the same rights as a Muslim Shia woman or a Catholic or a Maronite woman. So a lot of these issues came out naturally from these women, how they were struggling with these laws and, the patriarchy and these religious courts. But then, yes, it's the past 5 decades, because a lot of the women took me back also to the Civil War. And this is where you see that there has been no proper healing in Lebanon. There's been no healing after the Civil War. There was no reconciliation, no reparation. And the Beirut explosion triggered a lot of gory memories and painful events from the Civil War that these women had already survived. Of course, I'm talking about the elderly, or the generation that survived the Civil War, because there are also young women in the book that don't necessarily remember that, but they remember other bouts and cycles of violence in Lebanon. So when you read the book, you feel like, oh, these women did not just survive the Beirut explosion. They've been surviving endless cycles of violence. And the reason is, and that's the main theme of the book, is impunity. Because there has been no accountability. And when it comes to Beirut explosion, it's still the case. Today, 4 years on, no one has been held accountable. And we're nowhere near finding out what the truth is, what caused the explosion. And no official has, gone to court or is in prison. So really, impunity is a very big theme in I would say in Lebanon's recent history, and and patriarchy and these laws that continue to discriminate against women in Lebanon. And you'll also see that the book is not just narrated from the perspective of Lebanese women, but also foreigners. So there are migrants, refugees. There's an Australian woman who lost her son during the Beirut explosion. And the idea was also to give the already marginalized communities in Lebanon, a platform and an opportunity to tell their stories, because they're already forgotten and marginalized, but they became even more vulnerable with the economic crisis and the Beirut explosion.
That is one thing that I noticed in the book, was not only the diversity of women that were interviewed, from Lebanese women to migrant women to foreign women, but also the diversity of issues that they were facing. And so, no chapter was the same, even though there were ties and themes between them. And so one of the things I wanted to ask you was what you thought the most challenging issue for women in Lebanon is today, or in other words, what exactly is tying them together, considering that each type of woman that you interview faced a slightly different issue depending on her circumstances.
Yeah, I would say those that are left behind, that stayed in Lebanon, because some of the women in the book have already left. What tied them together is survival. It's a life of survival, and it's difficult because I'm in touch with so many of them, and things are not getting better. So survival, and then I would say what links all of the women together is something that I already touched upon. It's impunity. They're all victims of impunity, and they're all fighting for a sense of justice, whether it's for the Beirut explosion, whether it's for the financial crisis, whether it's for the civil war, or the laws that discriminate against them. So that's what brings them together. It's this sense of impunity and this fight for justice.
And then kind of looking towards the future. They're all the women in Lebanon are going through this sense of survival, life of survival, and sort of seeking for justice, as you mentioned. So looking forward, I noticed at the end of the book, you glimpse at what could have been for Lebanon. And in a way, I thought it was very optimistic considering the current political climate. Where do you see the trends moving in terms of justice, women's rights in Lebanon? And also considering this broader, it's a dual question, so you can break it up, but considering the broader context of state failure, how do you, and what do you see as the most effective mechanism for change for women, for justice for women, and what needs to happen to really get to that point?
Yeah, these are very good questions. So regarding future prospects, to this day, the fight of the families, of the victims of the Beirut explosion does not look very promising. 4 years on, as I mentioned, the national and the local probe and investigations reached dead end. It's been compromised and hijacked by the political establishment. And the only hope, and I think that's where, a positive prospects lie, is at the international level. So using international mechanisms to be able to find the truth and, reach some kind of accountability. And I'll just mention what one of the committees of these victims is doing is trying to pass a resolution at the level of the Human Rights Council at the UN for an independent investigation, an independent fact-finding mission, as they call it, into human rights violations on August 4th. That's the framework. But the idea here is we first need to know what happened. We have more questions than we have answers to this day. We have an idea, maybe, but so much is still unknown, and we cannot rely on the political establishment to give us these answers, because if you look at Lebanon's history, you will see that, impunity has always reigned, and everyone's, the political establishment has evaded accountability. One example is the civil war. So the only hope is at the international level, and maybe if there's some kind of movement there, then the local probe and investigation can move forward again, or at least they can rely on the work that's been done by a very competent judge, but who has been unfortunately sidelined by the political establishment. And when it comes to women's rights, I think, that takes me to your second question. I think power is never going to be given to women. Women have to take power. Power is taken, it's not given. And Lebanon's modern history has showed us that women were prominent players and change makers. We don't know about it. One reason is because they don't get to write history. The narrative is not written from their perspective. But I also think, today women in Lebanon are not doing enough to push the boundaries. The political establishment in Lebanon is not going to give them their rights. That's very obvious. There are competent women MPs, of very, very few of them in parliament. There aren't that many. There are, I think, 8 women, if I'm not mistaken. And, the rest is men, 120 men. And they might find some allies among the men, but I think they should not wait for anyone to give them their rights, and they should be fighting for that. A lot of the change that we've seen in Lebanon came from the grassroots, so local organizations. I'll give you an example. There was a domestic violence law that was passed in 2014. That was the hard work of a lot of women on the ground, women-led organizations, feminist movements, and we have very vibrant feminist movements, and they're very competent. So they need to keep doing what they're doing. And unfortunately, with the economic crisis today, some people would tell you, oh, it's no longer a priority. But we should not divide rights. I think women's rights is very much an intrinsic part of human rights and basic rights. And they should not be sidelined because of the crisis, quite on the contrary. And I think something that's very important is women need to push themselves more to be in leadership positions, whether that's in the economy or at the political level. That's the only way to, to be able to lead to any change, any reforms. It has to be from within these leadership and positions of power, and that's not something we're seeing, unfortunately. And last time I checked, 25% of women only were in the official labor force. I know a lot of women work in the black market without any protection and safety nets. I mean, most people don't have safety nets in Lebanon, but yeah, it's a very low number, although Lebanese women are very educated. So the education numbers are much higher. So really pushing the boundaries in leadership positions everywhere, that's very important. But yeah, in summary, we have to take power. Power is not going to be given to us.
Thank you for your answer. That was, an excellent overview of the state of affairs for women in Lebanon today, and also and your assessment of what the prospects are moving forward. Thank you again, Dalal, for taking the time to chat with me today, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.